This is part 2 in a 2-part series on how to build phone verification into iOS apps using twilio-verify with Swift, based on the blog post by Kelly Robinson. In part 1, we showed how to take a country code and a phone number and run it through twilio-verify to get an SMS. In this video, we'll take that SMS and write the rest of the app to verify the phone number. We'll start by adding some code to our verify API helper. Namely, we need to add the function that allows us to check the verification code against the twilio-verify API. So we'll create a static function called validate verification code. This is going to take a country code, a phone number, and then the verification code that was returned in that SMS. And we're also going to have a parameter here that is a completion handler that will allow someone calling this to handle the check result that comes back from our API call. The first thing we're going to do is create some parameters just as we did for the starting the validation. This is going to be via SMS. It's going to take a country code parameter, a phone number parameter, and a verification code parameter. We're just going to pass the parameters that were passed in to this function to the twilio-verify API. Once we have our parameters set up, we can use the request helper that we created in part 1 to make an API request to the check path to check the verification code, and we'll pass in the parameters. Our API request will return some JSON data, so we'll have access to that here inside of the handler. And we're going to use a JSON decoder to decode the JSON, so we'll create one now. Then inside of a do block, we'll save our decoded JSON into a constant called checked. That's going to be of type check result, and it'll indicate whether there was success or failure in the verification process. Then on the main queue, using the dispatch queue, we'll run our completion handler so that our calling function can handle the check results. And then we'll return a verify result indicating that the check was successful, passing in the checked message. Just in case the JSON was not possible to decode, we'll return a verify error indicating that the JSON could not be deserialized. Now that we have our verify API helper updated, we need some UI to call it from, so let's head back to our storyboard and we're going to add a new view controller. And we're going to put it right next to the enter phone number, since the enter phone number screen is going to transition to this screen once we punch in a phone number and hit verify phone number. I'm going to pull out the side panel here. We're going to be adding a text field here. So I'll drag in a text field onto the screen, and I'm going to set its placeholder text to verification code, since that's what we want the user to punch in. You're not going to be able to see all of it right now because I'm going to stretch it out here in a second. Then we're going to add a label. This is going to be a status label that'll indicate either success or failure for our verification check. So we'll put status message goes here, and that's all we need to do with the label for now. I also centered the text. Then I'll add a button underneath it. This is going to be our verify button, so I'll change its text to verify. Next, I'm going to group all 3 of these into a vertical stack view like I did in the first video. This time I'll walk through what I do. If we group it into a stack view, then I can set the pin constraints, 20 from the top and 16 from the 2 sides, and add the 3 constraints. That'll make the stack view stretch out. Then I'll set alignment to fill, which will make things go edge to edge, and I'll set the vertical spacing between them to use standard values. That's all for our stack view. Now we need some code to represent our view controller. So create a new CocoaTouch class, and we're going to call this check verification view controller as a subclass of UI view controller. Add that to your project, and then I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. This is some code that we don't need down here at the bottom, and we'll just delete it. Then I'll save this and head back to our storyboard. And if we select our view controller here in the storyboard, we can go to the identity inspector and set its class to the check verification view controller. And then we'll be able to go over to the assistant editor to hook up our outlets and actions. I'll first control drag from the verification code field and drop that inside of the check verification view controller and create an outlet called code field. Next, I'll control drag from the status label and drop that into our view controller. And I'll name this one status label. Finally, I'll control drag from the verify button down into our code and add an action called validate code. All right, that's all we need to do here in the assistant editor. One more thing with this status label though, I'm going to go over and change its hidden property to true because we don't want to see it when we first see this screen. We only want to see it when we have a result to show. Okay, one last thing to do in our storyboard, control drag from the verify phone number button over to the check verification view controller and hit show for the segue. these two screens will be linked through hitting that verify phone number button. Head back over to the check verification view controller, and we're going to add a couple properties. We need a country code property and a phone number property. These are going to get passed in from the start verification view controller. So if we head back over there, we can override the prepare for segue function on that view controller to pass in those values. So we'll do override func prepare, and that's going to be prepare for segue. And inside of here, we'll check if the destination is the check verification view controller, which it will be since that's the only segue we have hooked up. Then we can set those properties on the destination. So we'll set the country code equal to the country code field's text value and the phone number to the phone number field's text value from the start verification screen over on the check verification view controller. Heading back into the check verification view controller, we can head down into the validate code now. And the first thing we're going to do is reset the status label. So if it's been showing, we're going to clear its text out and set it back to hidden. Now that our UI is set, let's check the code. So we're going to get the code field's text. Assuming the user has punched something in, this code variable will set to code field's text. And if it does, then we'll use the verify API helper to call validate verification code. We're going to pass in the country code and phone number that were passed in from the start screen, along with the code that was entered on this screen. And then inside of the handler, we'll deal with the checked result that comes back from the validate verification code function. We're going to check to see if checked.success equals true. If it is, then we know that the verification was successful. Otherwise, we know it failed. So inside of our success block, we'll first set the status label's text color equal to UI color.green, since we want to show a positive result in green in this application. Then we'll set the status label's text to success and set its is hidden property to false. In your application at this point, you would know that the verification was successful and you could continue on in your application to the next step in the user creation process. But for here, we're just going to show a status label to indicate success or failure. If checked.success was false, then we want to do the opposite. We're going to set the status label's text color to red. We're going to set the status label's text to the verification was unsuccessful. And we're going to also set it to is hidden equals false so that it shows up on the screen. And that's all for our application. So if I give it a run and pull out my phone, then I should see our UI. I can punch in the country code and phone number just like we did last time. But this time when I hit verify phone number and I receive the text message, I can actually punch that into our verification field. So there's the code. iOS is going to help me out here. It's right there. It says from messages and I can hit it and verification was successful. Now if I go back and do it again and I don't punch in that number, this time instead when we get the text message, I'll punch in 9999 and we'll see that we get the failure message. That's all there is to it for this verification in iOS using twilio-verify. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the subscribe button over on the left. If you want to watch another video, I picked one out just for you in the top right, and if you're looking for the code, there's a button in the bottom right for that. Until next time, I'm out of here.